So if you look at the diagram right here, you'll see these rockets over here, and it's basically the Apollo program on steroids. I mean, that's all it is. And to me, that's also a bit interesting because here we are, 40 years later, and that's all we could come up with so far. And it's very interesting to see the quote-unquote progress. But that's beside the point. Eventually, we will return to the moon, and that is for different factors of why. Resources, raw materials that we need here on Earth, or just for the sake of exploration, because we, as I said before, are the species of explorers. We always want to know what's out there. And yes, I'm aware that many people are pushing for a unmanned space exploration with robots and with unmanned ships and things like that. And we will most definitely do that. However, the future does lie that we will be part of these explorations because in the end, it's our human brain that can react to the circumstances that we're in, and not some robot that is controlled from here remotely. So, as with everything, we will start out small, with a small base on the moon that will eventually grow larger. And from there, we'll go to Mars. And the same thing will happen there, that we will go there with small equipment, and then we will build larger structures. And mind you, none of this is going to happen personally, I don't think, in our lifetime. This is something, that maybe will take 500 years. So that's definitely something I would like you to keep in mind. Now, after we go to Mars, what will be the next, quote-unquote, natural step? Well, we'll go to outer space, and we will explore deep space. Now, the debunkers have this one great argument that they always hurl at me, saying, well, there is no way that we can traverse the distances between the stars, because the stars and the galaxies, not the galaxies, but the stars themselves, the solar systems, are so far apart that there is no way that we can go from point A to point B. And they are wrong. Because tonight when you go home, I want you to Google Generation Starship. And a Generation Starship is something that you're looking at right here, which is obviously a computer rendition, which means that you have this giant wheel that can be built in the zero gravity of space, kind of like in Star Trek, and this wheel essentially will turn on its own axis, thus creating artificial gravity. And that means that by having artificial gravity, all those other quote-unquote problems that we have regarding, being in zero gravity and floating around and then having the loss of bone mass and things like that, those are very serious problems that we're facing right now with our astronauts who are in the ISS right now, International Space Station. But by creating artificial gravity, you don't even need any exotic, secret alien technology. You can just have this wheel that goes on its own, that turns on its own axis, because what you'll have is, by this turning around, you can basically just imagine your clothes in the washer during the spin cycle. They're pushed against the walls of the drum, and therefore you can create, if you imagine that this room is part of a giant wheel that turns slowly on its own axis, you create artificial gravity, so you can have potentially a living habitat in outer space. Now, mind you, none of these things here are, I did not invent those things. This is all stuff that has been presented by astrophysicists, by rocket scientists, so very smart people who know what they're doing. Now, the reason why this is called a Generation Starship is because, let's say you have a crew of 100, that board this ship, they will die on that ship, on the journey. And so they will procreate on that ship. And so only the 6th, 7th, 8th, or even 10th or 20th generation will arrive at the destination planet. And like this, the astrophysicist by the name of Michael T. Savage, he proposed that if you arrive at a destination planet, and if we can do this, we will have the capability of doing the following. If we build another generation spaceship there, and then 2 ships go out, and then they also arrive at a destination planet, and then they also build another ship, you have 4, and then 8, and 16, so it's the snowball principle. You can conceivably colonize our entire galaxy in 11 million years. Now, I am aware that is a crap load of time. But in the chronology of the universe, it's a blip. It's nothing, 11 million years. And so, with the concept, and this is not an exotic concept, this is very nuts and bolts, very simple stuff that we have the blueprints for. We could conceivably build it today if the politicians would, open their eyes. And, so this is not science fiction. I mean, of course it is, but at the same time, it's not an exotic idea. So this means that we can traverse the vast distances between the stars, because the skeptics are right that between the stars, the distances are huge. But in their argumentation, I'm always wondering, because they always say, well, we can't do it because we can't come back and tell everybody about it. Well, whoever made the rule that if we go out there, we have to come back and tell everybody about it? No, I don't understand where that rule came from. Because for the sake of exploration, that becomes irrelevant. So, hypothetically speaking, I told you that we would be on another planet in 1,000 years from now. And that planet, for argument's sake, happens to host some type of humanoid life. And that humanoid life happens to be, technologically speaking, very primitive. So what will we do? Will we just stand around and watch them and observe and then take off again, following the quote-unquote prime directive? Or will we interfere with their development? And I think the answer is very clear to every single person in here. We human beings cannot leave anything untouched. We have to probe everything, and today with Facebook, we have to poke everything too. And so, we will, of course, do both. Of course, we will watch them from afar and try to learn their ways, potentially even, providing they have language, we will learn their language, and then we will actually start to interfere with their cultural development. And now, I said something very important that I would like you to keep in mind, and that is, if we find a species that's technologically primitive, not intellectually. And that is something I'm going to be repeating a whole bunch of times tonight, because I'm always accused of saying, or allegedly saying, that our ancestors were stupid. Well, they were not. They were as intelligent as we are today, but their technological frame of reference was much lower than what we have today. So, if we arrive on that planet, or when, then all of a sudden, we would like to push the species in a more technological direction, and that's why we will teach them in mathematics, we will teach them in astronomy, architecture, engineering, agriculture, all those different scientific disciplines. And how will we do this? Well, for starters, we have to arrive, or we will arrive, or we will descend from the sky. Now, imagine that happening. We're not anything special. The only thing that makes us special is that we happen to have the technology to reach their planet. But anything other than that, we still go to the bathroom like them. We still are hungry like them. We still need to provide food for ourselves and shelter like them. The only thing that sets us apart is that we happen to have a spaceship and we descend from the sky. And so, after we have completed our mission, or during our completion of the mission, I would like to answer the, not answer, but quickly refer to the whole prime directive scenario, which suggests that a species should always be left alone to their own devices. Because the prime directive is also hurled at me at all times, saying, well, how can you say that our species or our civilization in the past was tampered with or interfered by extraterrestrials? What, don't they have the prime directive? Thank you. It's Star Trek, for crying out loud. It's not real life. So the idea of the prime directive is wonderful, but it's not reality. Because like I said, because of our human ego and wanting to prod and interfere and do everything with other, I mean, it's happening all around us every single day, to suggest that somehow extraterrestrials have a higher moral ground than we do is absolutely preposterous. So forget about the prime directive. It's a great idea, but if you philosophize about it, it's non-existent, because just like ego is pretty pervasive in human society, I personally think that ego permeates the entire universe of people wanting to do stuff. And so, while we're on that planet, we of course would like to leave behind a couple of messages. Messages that we were there on their planet. Because we'll know that once we leave, 1,000 years in their future, or let's say 5,000 years in their future, they will reach a similar type of technological advancement as we have today. And then all of a sudden, our once very real visit will have fallen into the realm of myth, of legend, that ancient astronauts were never here on their planet. They were never visited, and anybody who talks about these things is a kook. So we will leave behind these messages. We will help them build certain structures, structures that contain mathematical messages, or structures and texts that do not fit into an ordinary chronological evolution of any given planet, where it's very simple. Any technological evolution, if we, let's say, look at the car, it started out with the Model T, and only today we have the Ford Taurus. Well, if you look at history, and I'm about to show this to you, the further back we go in time, the more Ford Tauruses we encounter, and no Model Ts. Now, from a logical perspective, that makes absolutely no sense. So my argument in my brief introduction here was, or is, that we will become ancient aliens on some distant planet in the distant future. And my question tonight is it possible that if we become ancient aliens on some other planet in the future, that we were visited by extraterrestrials here on Earth thousands of years ago that also gave us a kickstart in the quote-unquote right direction? And the answer is yes. So this is what eventually will happen on another planet. And so now, in order to prove to you that this is exactly what happened here on planet Earth, we're going to take a roller coaster ride around the world to check out some places that ordinarily speaking, should not exist, yet they're right in front of our faces, and we're not being told the truth about them. So, one additional argument that can be made for the ancient astronaut theory is a concept that I would like you to look up later on tonight, or tomorrow, because we're all going to go party tonight after this. That's what I like to hear.
You're coming.
I do need to relax after this, so. Anyway, I would like you to look up a ethnological term which is called a cargo cult. And a cargo cult essentially, and that's a university term. It's an academic term. It's not something, none of the stuff, by the way, that I'm presenting to you tonight, I've pulled out of thin air. Everything is documented, everything can be looked up. You can go and travel to these places, touch them, look at them, find them on the internet, in your library. So, none of this stuff is esoteric. None of this, was given to me by beings on another plane. Because, all that stuff, in my opinion, is total nonsense. So, the term cargo cult essentially means that if a technologically primitive, again, a technologically primitive society comes in contact with a technologically advanced society, over time, the technologically primitive society begins to worship the technologically advanced society. And this has happened throughout history, but especially as one of the most recent examples during the Second World War. When the Americans entered World War II, they all of a sudden had to set up bases in the South Pacific, and as they showed up with their ships, they showed up with everything, and of course, the natives were frightened because this would have been the first time that they had made contact with an outside society. And imagine all these warships all of a sudden showing up with their planes and everything else. Naturally, the natives were quite frightened. But after a while, they realized that the soldiers didn't want them, didn't want to do them any harm, and so they started to interact with the Americans. And so, over time, what had happened is that the Americans were quite nice to them. They started to give them, cookies and cans of corned beef and all sorts of goods, or, in other words, cargo. And as quickly as the Americans back then appeared on their islands, as quickly they disappeared. And so fast forward about 5-10 years, and these ethnologists in California, they wondered, hey, what do you think ever happened to those islanders in the South Pacific